Data's kind of interesting, mostly because lots and lots of people talk about it, and they usually put the prefix big in front of it, and then put the word strategy after it. And it is true that there are many big data sets, and it is true that you need a strategy. The conjunction of big data and strategy actually in action is something of a rare commodity. And I'm sort of taking the view now that data is to marketing in some ways like science is to religion, in that the more facts you think you have, the less faith you need. And what's interesting about that is the reason why religion in a way persists is that for some people there are never enough facts to fill in the faith. And when you think beyond that into marketing, there's also not enough facts to fill in the faith, because since we started dealing with digital everything, what we've seen on a customer journey or a customer experience or anything else you want to describe it as is more and more digital footprints being left behind in consumer behavior, whether it's web visits or cell phone visits or location tracking or scanner data in store or phone calls, depending on which institution's gathering the data. But there is still an enormous amount of white space that exists in data. And I think we're becoming kind of preoccupied now with not just thinking about the data, which is collectible, countable, sometimes accountable as well as countable, they're not the same thing, but very much about which bits remain unexplained. There are still human emotions. There are parts of human activity that you can't track. There are things that go on in people's brains and in conversations to individuals that form their view about brands, about shopping, about the timing of shopping, about what they think about e-commerce and everything else. And so I think that the emphasis in Group M, which has been very, very much driven by ingesting as many APIs as we can from different sources, building data marts out of those sources, looking at both the dog bites man stories, which are easy to find in data, and searching for the man bites dog stories in data, which sometimes are the ones that give you the really illuminating insight, but discovering that the white space that doesn't have the footprint on it is every bit as important as the footprints. And so joining those up in modeling generally, in terms of understanding the shape and structures of markets, predicting the future behavior of markets, is actually a richer kind of area than just trying to go through an attribution chain of one digital action after another and ascribe value to it. And so the complexity of attribution and the complexity of deriving insight is a combination of the dots and dashes that we collect, but also understanding what's going on in the white spaces. Gut feeling and intuition is a space for hypothesizing. So hypotheses are interesting. If you just look at raw data and don't have a hypothesis, it can take you down a path that might be right. The space for human intelligence, both intelligence broadly, but emotional intelligence particularly, is that whole area of saying, well, here are 8 or 9 or 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter, possible scenarios. And park those scenarios to one side, then look at the data and see if any of those scenarios are really validated by the data. And what you'll find is that many scenarios are invalidated in a pretty decisive fashion by the data, and some of them are validated fairly precisely by the data. And in broad terms, that's a reasonable way of thinking about the combination of human intuition and data, or if you like, right brain thinking and left brain thinking. The danger is always, if you decide you're in the left brain business and you follow that slavishly, you probably don't end up in a good place. And if you decide you're in the right brain business and your nod to the left brain is, I'll now go and find some data sets that support my right brain hypothesis, you're in a bad place as well. I think also the the area that's kind of fascinating in the digital world, in the world of attribution when it comes to that, is that we've always been really good at identifying events like sales and sometimes converting those sales into lifetime value numbers and so forth in order to ascribe value. The problem is there's an enormous number of things that happen in the purchase funnel or vortex or tornado or whatever word someone wants to give to that are more complicated than that. So there are many revenue events or proxies for revenue events that aren't as binary as a sale. And I think one of our priorities, and there are many simultaneously over the next year or 2 years, is to work with our customers and say, here's all the things that happen in the life of I've never heard of you to I would never buy anything else other than you, that are revenue events specifically, but also proxies for those revenue events. So what does top line awareness mean in relation to eventual sales is kind of interesting. What does someone looking at a website or giving you an email address mean in relation to those sales? And so it goes on through finance calculators and test drives. You can pick your category. There will be revenue events. And one of the big new sciences, I think, in data and marketing is going to be to disaggregate everything that goes on in that chain, place some kind of value on all those revenue events that you've identified, and look at how the volume to conversion bit works out. And I think that's going to change planning in media over time. And if I think back to John Wanamaker, who predeceased my career in marketing, or Lil Leverhulme, to whom the same quote about 50% of my advertising working and 50% of it not working, or more accurately, I know half of it works, I just don't know which half works. I think if they had a big data strategy and they were running real enterprises rather than maybe agencies, if you like, what they would use a big data strategy for is to say, I need to identify what the revenue events are in my business, and then all the way back from first contact, understand what those proxies are for revenue events and work out how to optimize down that chain to achieve an outcome.
We've gone to all these different places and been able to embrace the culture there. We learn what other agencies are like and how we can take all these best practices back to your own agency and really learn. And the best part, we always talk about, it's not about talking, it's about doing.